Hey everybody, welcome to episode 137 of WP Roundtable. My name is Kyle, and I'm doing WordPress stuff in Jackson, Michigan for a company called Easy Digital Downloads, a job I just started a few weeks ago. And today I'm joined by Mr. Aaron Jorbin. How you doing, Aaron?
Well, how are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm really excited to have you on the show. You've been on my list for a couple of years, and it's a pretty exciting and special chat we're going to have today.
I'm excited for it.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure getting to talk to you as always, and our conversation should be pretty fun. First things first, I want to cover our quick picks of the week real fast. My quick pick first is CodePen Projects I just came across. You might be familiar with CodePen.io. It's a pretty cool web service for front-end developers who want to explore, test, experiment with their front-end projects and have a showcase. It's a real-time live preview of your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's a pretty sophisticated tool. You may be familiar with Chris Coyer, the founder of CSS Tricks. This is his startup. And they just started an aspect to the CodePen service called CodePen Projects, which is, as they say, a full-featured front-end web development environment right in your web browser. So it's like taking it to a pretty new level, and it does allow you to really deploy your CodePen projects to a live URL, and it's pretty interesting. And I'm curious to see what people will do with this. CodePen is a pretty special tool with a lot of power to it. So take a look at it. Aaron, do you have anything to share?
Yeah. There's a writer that I've been really enjoying his work lately, a guy by the name of Christopher Wink, who's the founder of Technically Media. They have sites in Philly, Baltimore, Brooklyn, and a few other places that kind of covers the tech landscape. But his personal blog, ChristopherWink.com, he writes a lot about the challenges of running a media company in the common era. And he had a great article about 2-3 weeks ago about, why local media was great in the, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then declined, and basically focused on the declining profit margins of local media, and how that has discouraged experimentation. So.
Wow. That sounds like a pretty compelling article. I'd like to read it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Aaron. All right. So next, let's talk a little bit about you. I want to learn a little more about your background. I don't know a whole lot about it. So if you could, give us the rundown how you got where you are. And if you could, start back when, long before you were working for some spider or on the web, when you were young and had some aspirations of what you were going to do with your life. Tell us a little bit about what you thought Aaron Jorbin was going to try and accomplish.
So I am a guy that went to college originally majoring in film, actually in the great state of Michigan at Northern Michigan University up in the UP, a few hours north of where you're at, and a few hundred inches of snow more. But majored in film, but quickly learned that, as much as I enjoyed film, as much as I enjoyed the arts, it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to be doing. So I ended up getting a degree in economics and political science, and moving out to Portland, Oregon, kind of with, no real goal in mind. One of my friends and I were talking about an idea for a movie we had, a documentary. But, for the most part, it was basically going to just be just try to survive, find a cheap place to live. As the TV show Portlandia says, it's where Portland is where young people go to retire. And, kind of did that. And while I was out there, we, first we needed a website for the film. And then around the same time, some friends and I were joking around about starting a Onion type site, but focused on news from the future. And so this was right around the time like the iPhone came out. And so our first article was about the eyeglasses, basically a prediction of, what became Google Glass. But it was, I think 2030 with, you know, um, the head of Jonathan Ive, Futurama style as the spokesperson for Apple. Um, and that kind of was my first exposure to WordPress. I'd definitely been geeky and computer savvy. I ran Linux on my local computer. My suite mate got me into that, but I wasn't a coder by any sense of the imagination. And so I ended up getting books from the public library and going and sitting at the 24-hour coffee shop in town after I would get off work. And kind of, looking through these books, reading books on CSS, on, kind of just whatever I could get my hands on. And there weren't really books about WordPress at this time or at the library. And so WordPress was kind of just like, well, I got exposed to it and read the codex and started reading articles. And then, from there, started just like finding people on Craigslist that wanted to pay $25 to have me move their website from one domain to another. And it was like, well, yeah, I know how to do that. I've done that. I can, make $25 doing that. And, having no idea how much someone, should charge for building websites. And it kind of snowballed from there. The person would be happy with that. And so they'd ask me to help them with, something else. And this is, so this is probably about 2008 or so. And WordPress was a different world then. While there were lots of plugins, I don't think that, for me and for many people, there was less of a plugin first mentality and more of a like, if you need something, you probably have to build it. There were no page builders. There were no visual composers. If you wanted to have a customized layout, you had to figure out a way to do that. And so it really forced me to learn the code and to start, reading WordPress. And I started going to the weekly dev chats for WordPress and just kind of observing. And then I went to a Portland WordPress meetup that I look back at this later on, and Daniel Bachhuber was the one that announced it, who he's since become a friend of mine. And, I went to this meetup because I had a question, and it turned out like it was a core bug that I had discovered. And it was the fact that while get header takes a parameter, so you can have, get header and call it with, custom, and it'll look for header dash custom in your theme. That parameter wasn't being passed to the get header action. And so when I tried to hook into the get header action, I wasn't able to detect the, that it was a custom one or not.
Sure.
And, found that, emailed the WP Hackers mailing list about it, which led to someone opening a ticket on Track, submitting it on, submitting a patch. I tested the patch. I then, went in the weekly dev chat and, at the end during the, open floor, begged people to look at this patch and someone to commit it. And it got committed. And I was like, wow, I kind of just affected WordPress. And so from there, I started looking for, patches that I could contribute on. And there was a blog post, towards the end of 3.0, right before beta, about and it was Jen Milo had 3 ideas she wanted to see make it into 3.0. And I looked at one of the ideas and I was like, oh, I could do this. And I wrote up the code and I, submitted the patch, went in the dev chat and, encouraged people to look at it. Ended up going back and forth about 4 or 5 times with Andrew Nason on the code, on, how it should look visually. And then it got committed, and I was suddenly a core contributor. And I mean, I was visiting my then girlfriend at the time, and I ran home, and I was like, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god! You're not going to understand any of this," but I just contributed to WordPress. Like my code is now going to power 18% of the internet, and it was real exciting. And kind of from there, again, it just snowballed. Patch, one patch led to another, and here I am.
That's amazing. And there's a lot of stuff in that, and I think it's pretty cool that you left college with this kind of very open-minded view. I wonder if this is like just your personality or the circumstances. It sounds simple when you describe it briefly, but to leave college and say, well, maybe I'm not going to do that after all. Maybe I'll try this. Maybe I'll experiment here. Maybe I'll, with my friends, experiment with some projects and just see where things go. Unique position to find yourself in, and it sounds like a unique point of view to just be that open-minded about your future and see where things take you a little bit. So
yeah, I mean,
how was that influenced where you've ended up now, and do you still kind of have that view?
I still try to tinker and experiment and explore, who I am as much as I can. Over about a year and a half ago, I started finding myself doodling more and more, and that led to well, maybe I should try, actually getting, a real pad of paper and not just in a notebook and doing it. And that led to, me getting pastels, and then me getting watercolors. And I kind of just always enjoy, I'm definitely a believer in the philosophy of never stop learning, never stop pushing yourself, never stop experimenting, because you never know what you're going to find. And so it's led me to one of the topics I've been thinking about a lot lately is kind of where does art and design interact? So my college, I was in the art and design program, but the more I talk to artists, the more I talk to designers, I'm realizing while both of them are often very visual fields, they're very different but similar.
Sure. Yeah, that's a very curious topic.
Mm-hmm. And I don't really have a good answer for it yet. In some ways, I feel like both of them are about, in my eyes, about emotion and about, attempting to, with art, you're often trying to share your emotion in that work. With design, you're trying to often, spark some sort of emotion. Whether it's if your website is, designed to get people to buy something, you're trying to spark an attraction to a product that gets people to push the button to purchase it.
Sure. Wow, that's fascinating. A lot for reflection, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So let's catch up a little bit with where we're at today. So you started contributing to WordPress on the side. You did some little freelance projects. Sidebar, the projects that you and your buddy started up back then in Portland. What was the fate of them?
Like many side projects, they were better in theory than in practice. We had the film was an ambitious idea for a film that would have had us, traveling to Africa for a few months, and never could raise the funding to really do that. The comedy site, I think if we had stuck with it, it might have done something. But I mean, there's a dime a dozen blogs that try to make people laugh, and we never really. That was always just kind of something on the side.
Sure.
For us. I do still have the database backup of that somewhere. I've stopped renewing the domain at some point, but I've thought about setting it back up.
They sound like great ideas, and we all have no shortage, I think, of those. If you've been doing this for a while or working on the web, or been somewhat technically savvy, we all have those.
Yeah.
And I still have a handful every year. I'm like, should I let that go? Probably.
I think everyone has, at least one domain that they're not, they've bought, they're not using, and they are wondering, should I use that?
Yeah, that's funny. Or for those of us who spend a lot of time drinking late at after parties, probably considerably more than that.
Yes.
Okay, so let's catch up to today just a little bit. You worked for a company called SomeSpider. How did you end up here? And was there anything in between, professional WordPress related, that we missed?
So there were lots of things in between. My first kind of professional foray was at a company called Add This. It's the little orange share button that you've probably seen on websites on,
Really?
I think, about 15 million sites. And so I worked there, and I managed our WordPress plugin. I worked on a handful of, lots of internal projects. WordPress was still very much a side project for me at that point. But they did things like sponsored sending me out to WordCamp San Francisco, which exposed me to a lot of people. And that was, great in that regard. And then from there, I went to a small healthcare IT company called Privia Health. And that was, it was a Rails job, but I was mostly writing JavaScript and working on design there, UX and product stuff. And that was, a big difference for me, because it was the first job that I, didn't really understand the language the code was in, when I started. So I was learning Ruby, I was learning Rails, getting exposed to those ideas, and, working on other things. And then, and also I had never really, worked in like the healthcare field before that. And so learning about that was interesting. And from there, I went to Condé Nast, where I helped launch the New Yorker onto WordPress, Vogue, Self, Bon Appetit, and helped Wired with a couple of their bigger projects as well. And while I was there, they started donating some of my time to work on WordPress core. And that kind of, once I actually was able to, spend significant time, I was asked if I wanted to be a committer, and which was, simultaneously one of the most exciting and one of the scariest times. It's one thing to, submit code. It's another thing to decide like that code should go in.
I'm sure. I can only imagine.
But, I quickly learned, I had great mentors, Helen Hosandi, Andrew Nason, like both, along with, all of the other committers, really helped me learn to, be a good committer in my eyes, and learned, be able to decide, like, a lot of, with the committer, it's about trust. Someone becomes a committer because you trust their judgment. And like, they were basically saying like, we trust your judgment. That's why you have the ability to make these decisions.
Yes.
And,
Fascinating.
And from there, I briefly worked at Happy Tables, and ended up not being the right fit for me for them. So we parted ways, and I joined up with SomeSpider. It was nice to get back into the media world. Having spent a couple of years at Condé Nast, I really learned to love media. And at even going back to add this, we were a a publishing product company.
Right.
And so like that exposed me to like the publishing world. And so now Summit Spider, we are a fairly small team. We're up to about 30 full-time people across 2 brands. First one is scarymommy.com, which is the #1 parenting site on Facebook. We're, good size site. We got about 20 million monthly uniques, 4.5 million social fans across all the platforms. On Friday, we just hit 3 million Facebook fans. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, even though, parenting isn't necessarily my, forte, I don't have kids, but when I looked at the site or the page on Facebook and I noticed that all of my friends that are parents were fans of it, I'm like, okay, they're on to something. They know what they're doing there. And simultaneously working on a second brand, which should be launching a new website for it in the near future. And that is cafe.com, which is a politics, news, information, comedy for like the informed millennial.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a long-time, well-established brand, or is it fairly new?
Cafe is fairly new. Cafe has really, just been around probably a little over a year at this point. Maybe not quite a year. I don't remember the exact launch date. But already doing well. We should be hitting 1 million Facebook fans soon. Working on getting the new website for them. They have a great podcast that I've been listening to called Girl Friday, which is hosted by Aaron Gloria Ryan. And it is a good expose every week of women in the media and kind of the experiences of, being a woman in the media. And they have guests that range from Lauren Duca from at Teen Vogue to they had the head writer from Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And so kind of all facets of media, both, like the capital J journalism media and the, more entertainment focused side of media.
Sure. Fascinating. So tell us a little bit about your specific role.
So I'm the director of engineering and kind of, lead all of our engineering efforts. And so our sites are WordPress based, but I mean, we also are, exploring other avenues of distribution. I think one of the big challenges with media these days is that it's, you don't necessarily control the experience. It's not, on-site experiences all the time. And so a person may, ingest your content via Facebook, via an Insta article, or via AMP from Google or Apple News. I know I was talking to one of my friends from Vox Media recently, and they were saying that they're seeing more of their page views are coming off-site than on-site at this point. And so, it's an interesting challenge and an interesting time. At the same time, we're getting more and more video heavy. There was a report from the BBC not long ago that showed, video is super popular for them, but it's set-top applications that are proving to be the #1 means of, of viewership. So while, people are watching video online, they're watching it on their TVs, through Roku, through Apple TV, through all those Google Play, all the different set-top apps.
Yeah. Okay. So what's it like as director of engineering? Do you get to write code day to day? Are you orchestrating other engineers and doing code review? What are your responsibilities?
So both. I write a decent amount of code. I oversee all of the code that goes into production and do code review on everything. Right now, we are, we have a fairly small engineering team. There's myself, we have an ads engineer, and then we have some contractors that we work with as well. And so my role is probably mixed between, being a like senior developer that's writing a lot of code, being a engineering leader that's reviewing and mentoring, and being a product leader, and trying to set the mission of like, where are we taking this product, where does this go. I also work a lot with our design lead, and help him. I'm a big believer that as developers, we need to, as much as possible, QA design, and try to help designers find the bugs in their design as early as possible, much like we would hope designers can help us as developers find the bugs in our code. And so things like finding, we were looking at a design recently and noticed that our buttons and our headings were very closely designed. They looked extremely similar, almost to the point that you couldn't tell if something was a button versus something being a heading if you didn't know better. And so we were able to look at that and like catch that fairly early in the design process and make that change to like go a different direction with the buttons.
Wow. It's frankly a pretty inspiring story, Aaron, going from just 10 short years ago, you were looking for something and stumbled across WordPress with a pretty open mind, and didn't have any intention of turning this into your direction, but that's what happened. And then today you have developed such a level of trust and reputation that not only is this successful media company relying on you to approve everything that goes live for them, and those approvals are extremely critical to their business, I'm certain, but WordPress core itself is trusting you to make judgment calls on what goes into the code base for millions of people. So it's amazing that you stumble across WordPress and say, I'm just going to crush this. I'm going to just totally dominate and make it to that elite class of very few people who earn this level of trust. What can you look back? What are your takeaways for the time that you've learned this, mastered it, and built up that incredible level of trust for so many people?
I think the big things for me have been the liberal arts education that I have. I studied economics, and like that gave me, in many ways, economics and computer science are similar. They're both applied mathematics with its own, custom syntax. And so like that kind of gave me a foundation to go from. Even though I, didn't learn to code, I did learn math. And even though like, I now have been able to use those, like the skills I learned in economics to like run user tests, from there with that. I also think I've, was extremely lucky to have good mentors, at the right times. And, a lot of times these aren't necessarily formal mentorships, but they're, people that I can, trust to like have a conversation with when I need it to really help me out. And so, I mentioned Helen, I mentioned Nason. I had a handful of conversations very early on when I was first starting with WordPress core and contributing with Jen Milo that really helped, guide me towards understanding WordPress. I have had, incredible conversations with Daryl Cooper Smith over the years. And, these have kind of been the basis for me. I'm a big believer in like bouncing my ideas off of others whenever possible. An idea that you keep to yourself is probably going to die. But like if you set it free, even if you're not, it doesn't necessarily have to end up being your baby in the end. It can still be worth it. I did a blog post last summer about, this idea for what if, instead of using Travis for WordPress unit tests, what if we got the hosts to run the unit tests and report back to WordPress, how they are running. And now the hosting community in WordPress has started running with that idea. And like, it's WordPress is better. The world is better because that idea exists. And I mean, I'm not trying to kid myself when I say the world's better. It's not like it's, like it's not solving, poverty. It's not like fixing war. It's not, like ending famine. But I do think that I really agree with the WordPress mission of democratizing publishing. I think that people being able to share their ideas is, in general, a good thing. And anything that kind of helps reduce that barrier for people to be able to share, in my eyes, is good. I also think that, owning your data, which WordPress allows, in the long run, is important. And yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Excellent takeaways.
Mm-hmm.
So, WordPress has grown a lot. It's gotten big. When you started, I started not too long after getting exposed to WordPress, a couple of years. But even at that time, it was, we would look at it and say it's the most popular of the options that are out there. And now it's just dominant. It's the thing. There's not even a runner-up. WordPress is everywhere, and it seems like everybody's using it. And those of us, like yourself and myself, who've been heavily immersed in it and in this WordPress community and all things WordPress. We've been able to do that. Everywhere we turn, we can see and experience WordPress, and that's what we do. How important do you think it is that, especially those of us who are so immersed, look outside this WordPress bubble?
I think it's incredibly important. I think that it's simultaneously important both for us to go outside of the bubble, but also to bring more people, inside of it. And if you look at a lot of WordCamps, I've seen a handful of speakers at WordCamps that are decidedly not WordPress people, and they've given some of the greatest talks. My favorite WordCamp talk of all time was at WordCamp Boston 2011, and it was John Ressig, the founder of jQuery, standing at a chalkboard explaining how the internals of Sizzle, which is the CSS selector engine for jQuery, works. And jQuery and WordPress have a great relationship, but that's, that comes from people getting outside of the bubble, from, learning to meet people elsewhere. I went to and spoke at at PHP UK a few years ago, and that gave me the opportunity to meet, tons of people in the PHP community that I otherwise would not have met, and learn from them. And, I think that a lot of problems that open source communities have are the same no matter what. You always have a problem of how do you encourage new contributions? How do you get people to level up? One of the big things I think with WordPress is getting people to go from writing a patch to reviewing other people's patches, and giving good feedback to other people. And how does WordPress core, I don't necessarily think core does a great job of figuring out how to help people level up like that. You're kind of, people either do it or they don't. And there isn't good ways to encourage that. I know that Drupal had a program called the Drupal Ladder for a few years. It was basically, based on the idea of climbing the ladder of contributions. And I think, maybe something like that would be good. I know that there was a handful of workshops put on a few years ago, based on the idea of leveling up in WordPress, of going from someone that asks support questions to someone that answers them, and how to basically do that. And I think that, like, those are problems that are faced in all sorts of open source projects, and the more we can talk with other people about that, the better WordPress will be. um, I think that I'm actually working on a conference right now, WordCamp for publishers, and it's kind of based off this idea. There's so it's a complete experiment, but there's a community of people involved in publishing, involved in media, that meet through the WordPress big media meetups. They meet at conferences like SourceCon and NICAR and ONA, and what if we meet up and just talk about WordPress? Have it, have a celebration of our community in person, the same way that most WordCamps are designed to be a celebration of the local community. Our community, it exists online and it exists at other events, but let's try to celebrate it in person at a WordCamp.
Sure, sure. So this is a new idea.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners might not be familiar with the idea yet because you guys are still in the planning stages. What can you tell us about the specifics that you guys are trying to iron out? Where, when, who?
So it's going to be in Denver on August 17th through 19th of this year. And we actually have our call for speakers open, and we are accepting applications until May 10th. And, our goal is kind of just like WordPress for the media world. And so, I mean, that means for developers, designers, product, editorial, in all aspects of media, capital J journalism, to, full entertainment brands, but like, kind of like exploring, like, I'd love to see talks that kind of explore like what I view as, the big problems. So talks about, how do we handle the fact that, more and more traffic is offsite, and not taking place, on our websites? How do we handle, how do we monetize well? What's a good mix for, financial sourcing? Like, can we continue to rely on programmatic advertising? Is that going to be sustained?
Right.
And, but also, like, I think there could be a lot of really interesting design topics, on like, how do you figure out a good workflow? How do you scale a website's user experience when you go from like a handful of writers, editors, up to dozens of writers and editors? What do you need to do? How do you figure out like the right user roles and right user permissions in WordPress in those instances?
Sure. Yeah. Those sound like fascinating questions to cover and well worth a unique event for this particular audience. This could be pretty special. I'm curious, when the idea came about and you started discussing it, what made you decide to go the route that you did? And noting that you have lots of options. You could have done any number of things. Your own independent event, just like WP Campus, WordPress for higher ed, or LoopConf, for high-end developers and so forth. What made you decide to reach out and say, WordCamp Central, can we try an experiment here?
So I mostly came on after that, but I know that like a lot of it was based on the idea that like you get a lot from WordCamp Central by being a part of it. You don't have to worry about like the infrastructure for selling tickets. You don't have to worry about accepting money. Like you get the global sponsorship money right off the bat. And in my eyes, the guidelines for running an event are, not too strict. They are, very reasonable guidelines that kind of align a lot with, my personal beliefs. I like that WordCamps are not expensive. My first WordCamp, so I probably wouldn't have gone if I hadn't won a raffle ticket at my local meetup for it. Because otherwise, like, I don't know if like I would have been able to like that month spare $40. Like I definitely, when I was, freelancing, I was struggling. It wasn't all gold. It was definitely feast or
Like two websites to make that.
And I think that a lot of times, especially as, WordPress professionals that, kind of grow up and get, more senior, we sometimes forget about, the fact that like there are people that like want to go to the events that like, yeah, $40 is, a chunk of change for them. That's not like, that's not pocket money, if you will. And so, but like $40, that's still better than like if you look at, I went to JS Comp a few years ago, and tickets for that were, I think, $1,200. You look at the O'Reilly conferences, and all of those tickets are, $1,000 or so. Like it's, WordCamps are, much more accessible, and I really like that. I like when I get to go to a WordCamp and sit down at a lunch table, and not introduce myself and just ask people, like, so what do you do with WordPress? What brought you here? And here, like, you go to, cities like I went to WordCamp Lancaster. I was able to chat with people that like, oh yeah, they run a local design agency, and it's, 3 people, and every city, has, these small agencies. You look at like, and that's in many ways why WordPress is successful, because it can be counted on by people in every city. Look at like, I think WordPress, and one of its biggest challenges is the fact that it's really kind of fighting things on so many different levels. You have like the very like the user level of like, a person wants a website. The small business, this like, we need a website. We're not a online brand, but we need an online piece of our brand. To like the like larger companies where maybe we have a site, a shop, or maybe like we're, a media company, or like need a online piece to like the very top of the chain. And I think in each of those, like, WordPress has different competitors and it has different challenges. And making an experience that's flexible and usable for people at all of those levels, is important. If you think about like when, when Microsoft decides they want a new website, it's going to be, uh, 5 different WordPress agencies, a few Drupal agencies, places that have their own custom, Adobe, like it's many different places kind of all, going after it. Versus, the small companies where, you might be deciding, do I want to have a website with EDD versus do I want to have a Shopify site? And, how do I handle that trade-off?
Right. Absolutely. So I see it's called a WordCamp for Publishers,
Mm-hmm.
and it's officially published on the schedule now.
Yep.
So your site is live and looks beautiful. Very nice.
I can't take any credit for that. But we have a great group of organizers is working on it. I'm working primarily on the programming side of things, the speaker side, along with Chris Hardy and Libby, whose last name I can't remember right now. But we also have, some of the people from Alley Interactive, Matt Johnson, Brad, Davis, people from a few automaticians. Steph Yu is one of the lead organizers, along with Adam Schweikart, who's at Mother Jones and formerly INN.
Right.
Are the leads.
Yeah, this looks like a recipe for success, and definitely is going to be interesting to watch. Because what does the question I want to know is, what does this mean for the future? There hasn't been a precedent for this, for a single track WordCamp.
Well, it's interesting because if you look back at WordCamps originally, there were many WordCamps for education in like the 2008, 2009, 2010 era. And, we kind of went from like the Wild West of WordCamp days, where anything went to, I don't want to say strict rules. Like, they've always been guidelines, and they've always been like, if you want to try something new, talk to us. Like, we're open. Like, WordCamp Central has always been open to experimentation, but now it seems like people are really starting to, embrace that experimentation. And I've heard talk of, other kind of focused WordCamps, which I think could be really interesting. I do think it's important, though, that they remain not just this is the one time of year that we get together. I think WordCamps work well when they are a celebration of a local community or of a community. And when that community is able to keep the conversation going throughout the year. I was one of the leaders of the WordPress DC community for a few years while I was there. And getting the people that would come in month after month was, big. Many of the people ended up becoming friends. It would be people that I would start seeing like, oh, I saw you at this WordCamp a few weeks ago. Like, what'd you think of it? And like that community has really grown and been amazing to see. But it's because they have, monthly meetups. And for a while we had a event there, the open source barbecue, bring us back to getting outside the bubble. It was the WordPress meetup, the Drupal meetup, the PHP meetup, the jQuery meetup, Android and Cassandra as well. And we did one huge barbecue on a company's rooftop, a Tuesday night in the summer. And, kind of just was, purely social event, but it was really a chance to, get the groups intermingling and eat barbecue.
Yeah. Yeah. Not something you can easily get too much of. All right. So we're kind of winding down on our time here and covered a lot of cool stuff. Just a couple kind of wrap-up questions for you, Aaron.
Yep.
Let's look ahead at your schedule a little bit. For the rest of 2017, where might somebody bump into you in person?
So I'm still trying to figure that out. I just saw this last, it might have been yesterday, but it was very recently. WordCamp DC is now officially happening.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to try to make it down for that, since it is my formal local community. Also, WordCamp for publishers, I would definitely be at. Beyond that, trying to figure out. I try to make it to WordCamp Philly every year. I will be at WordCamp US for certain. I'm on the also on the organizing committee for that. And yeah.
What don't you do? Do you have any really cool suggestions for guests that I should invite on the show in the future?
So the reason I know about your podcast is you had one of my favorite people, Beth Soderberg, already. So I can't recommend her, but I can recommend Courtney O'Callahan, who is one of the leaders of the WordPress DC community now. She is great. Tracy Levask from Yikes in Philly. Lauren Pittinger from LB Design in the Philly area. Lisa Yoder from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. She spoke at WordCamp US. All of them are doing really cool things. Mike Schroeder, I think, is always also a really awesome guy to talk to.
Sure, for sure. Awesome. Those are some good recommendations. You know, as we wrap up, I'm curious, is there anything else that you would like to share, parting words of wisdom, pitches of anything, or just in general, how someone might get in touch with you?
So people can get in touch with me. The best way is probably Twitter, where I'm at Aaron Jorbin. I do try to blog at daily.jorb.in. I have not been a daily blogger, though, for the last few months, so may need to rethink that domain again. I will say that I am hiring for a developer right now that will be New York City based. So if someone is watching or listening and wants to come work on Scary Mommy and Cafe with me, they should get in touch.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, good stuff. Well, Aaron, it's been a pretty awesome discussion. I really am very grateful that you took the time out of your evening to talk with me. And thank you so much for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
I look forward to bumping into you at an event this year, or maybe a few.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right.
That's it.
All right. Thanks.